Father, how are you?
Great, always great.
So, as we gather here, just wanted you to have an opportunity. When we celebrated our 85th anniversary a couple years ago, you were a huge part of that and had an opportunity to share some stories. And looking back to your years of ministry at St. Thomas More Newman Center, what do you think was the most profound experience that you had?
I can't think of a tougher question to answer than that. I had some unbelievable ones. Most of them were at the time tragedies, things like that, that they're memorable even though you no longer remember those things. I think one of the highlights in my time there, we had an older priest, Father Barden, and he would come in and he was there when we first came almost, when I first came in 57, and he'd always been trying to be the best pastor, and then if something would spark him, he'd go another direction. But everybody who knew Father Barden loved him. The kids called him Father B. And he would come any time in the day or the night and always be welcome. In fact, we named the recreation room after him, the Barden Rec. And it was very fitting and very appropriate. But he loved those kids and they loved him. He'd give them all the time they wanted. And they had a Father B's forum every Thursday night down in the basement of the old house. And the place would be just packed, wall to wall. And the people would try to ask him a question that would embarrass him. I remember this one night, the question they came up with is it all right for a woman to pose in the nude for art's sake? And Father B didn't hesitate a moment, just like he was waiting for that question. His answer was, well, if her husband's name is Art, she can pose any way she wants. And that was the kind of humor he had. It caught everybody off guard, and they dearly loved him. They could hardly wait for the next Thursday. And he'd go from 7 until everybody had to get to bed for one reason or another. But everything he did was, they loved him. And he was a great part of the whole organization. And I would think his presence did as much as being memorable for those students at that time as anything that was happening at that time. But
You arrived at the Newman Center in what year?
57.
57.
That was an interesting thing. I was in my office and this girl came in. She was from, what's the little town just this side of Jackson?
Alpha.
Alpha. That was her hometown. And she said, what are you doing here? She said, I'm the chaplain, new chaplain at the Newman Center. Well, the person who preceded me was Father Ireland. He was a real gangbuster. He was something else. And she said, well, are you a Jesuit? And I said, no, I'm not. She says, well, that's a qualification. I said, I don't pass that one. She said, were you a chaplain in the service? And I said, no, I was in the Navy, but I wasn't a chaplain. I went in out of high school. Well, that's number 2 again. So you can't be a Newman chaplain unless you were a chaplain in the service. She's number 3, and she gave 5 altogether. And finally she says, what do you have that qualifies you to be Newman Center chaplain in Mankato? So I opened my desk and I took a letter out and I said, here it is, right here. It was a letter of appointment from the bishop. I said, that's the only qualification I have. Well, she'd asked me, what do you have to the Newman? And I said, well, I was a Newman student at the University of Idaho in my freshman year, so I know that much about it. But that was the highlight in my life, the first few moments I was in the place. But I can't think of any moments that weren't great. I really can't. They always had a great bunch of people there, those students, and they treated me like a dad. Always with reverence, and I treated them like a bunch of my kids. In fact, Bishop Fitzgerald used to get upset with me when I'd call them kids. You don't call them, you call them students. And I said, and finally he gave up on that one. And the banquets we used to have to raise money for the center, they were great. We always had great entertainment.
You and your correspondence when you were at the Newman Center, and then later on still, whenever you sign your letters, how do you sign your letters?
Cor ad cor.
Why do you do that?
Heart speaks to heart. Yeah, that was Cardinal Newman's pen name, really. He signed everything that way. Cor ad cor loquitur, coat of arms. And I hope that one day he gets canonized. He sure seems to be almost there, but I don't know why they're not doing it. Yeah.
Do you remember how long you were at the Newman Club before you looked at building a new center?
I went there in '57, and the cornerstone says 61. So that's when the cornerstone was there, and it didn't get quite completed the first year. So it would have been 62. It would have been 5 years of without the new center, and then 10 more years with the center. We had the big, beautiful building, very happy with it. We had a place for the Sunday masses. We had a chapel for daily mass. And the kids really wanted to have mass where they could have their own services. And they were really determined, and I was too. I wrote the bishop a letter asking for permission, and he said, "No, you're not a parish, and you're not a pastor." So we used to have a meeting once a month at the parish council in Newman. And so they were very upset by that. And I said, "Well, look, when the bishop talks, that's it." And they said, "Well, if we figure a way to go around that, would you say okay?" I said, "There isn't a way." So the fellow says, "Well, let us talk about it and let's discuss it in a couple of days." So 3 or 4 of the kids came up and they talked about it. They said, "Here's what we have as a plan. We'll all go from the campus down to the early mass at St. John's. Or if you think we should go to the 10 o'clock, that'd even be okay too. And we'll get all of our friends to come along with us, and we want to be there half an hour early. And the people of the parish won't have room to come in." So I said, "If you do this, you do it on your own." Well, they did, and Monsignor Matthews was really absolutely upset. So he wrote a letter to the bishop that Sunday afternoon, and we got a letter back from the bishop that we had permission to say mass at the Newman Center. I'm not sure if that made us a parish or not, but at least we received a book and for the baptisms and the confirmations and the marriages and so forth. But those kids were fantastic. They could figure out angles I never would have thought of. They're always way ahead of me. I couldn't believe it. We had a hearse for our orchestra. We had a real good dance band in those days, and they didn't have room for their instruments, so they bought a great big Mariah, an old hearse, for the instruments. I never found out this until after long gone. And they used to take that big hearse up to the outdoor theater, and they'd park it so it'd cover about 5 speakers. And they'd sit there sideways and every other way in that old hearse, on top of the old hearse, and buck night, $1 for the whole carload, and they would pack those kids in there. But again, I didn't hear about that until afterwards. That was fun to find out afterwards. Yeah.
So how many years have you been a priest?
55 in May, Memorial Day,
And where did you spend your longest ministry at?
at the Newman Center.
Okay.
Yeah, I was actually, I was at St. Joe's in Good Thunder for the first 10 I was there, 57 to 67. Then we started having mass there, then the bishop had me just with the Newman Center. I remember one time, every year I'd go up to New Prague, and they had a day of recollection there. And I'd give as much time as I could to talk with these seniors, that's what it was, Catholic seniors. And this one kid came in and he said, "You know, my teachers tell me, my counselor tells me that I can't make it through college. What do you think?" I said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "Well, they've convinced me." And I said, "Well, why don't you give it a try? You can always drop out. You're not going to start if you don't start now." Anyway, I kind of forgot about that incident. And then 4 years later, he came across the stage and got his diploma, and he came over and he says, "Thanks, Father, for encouraging me. If it weren't for that day of recollection, New Prague, I don't know what I'd be doing." And right now, I'd have to admit, I don't know what he's doing either. You lose track of them sometimes. Kids are the most fantastic people.
Now there was an award that, like a trophy of some sort. Could you describe that trophy and explain
Well,
what
the
that
trophy was a rather huge loving cup, and it was presented to the outstanding club, they used to be called clubs always instead of centers, outstanding club in the nation of the Newman Center. And well, we started winning that, and if you win it 3 years in a row, then you keep it. And we won it 5 years in a row, and the 6th year we won it too, but we turned it down because we were in an argument over whether or not the chaplains would control the money or the students would at the national level. And so they took the money away from the students that year and put it with the chaplains. Well, it wasn't long before both organizations kind of ceased to exist, but we won 2 more years after that, so we won it 8 years in a row, which is adequate. And we put it aside until you came, and then you'd heard about it, so I had to confess that I'd stolen it.
And now we have it safe at the Newman Center.
Good, it's where it belongs.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's also a picture of you standing in front of a boat.
That was an incident, and then some. George Herder and I became good friends. He had the Herder Enterprises in Waseca, and then he opened one out in Mitchell, I think, South Dakota. And he made every kind of sporting thing there was, from boats to bobbers. And we became good friends. Father Jewison and I were both at Winona at the time. Came over here at his invitation to pick up something we wanted, if we were go hunting or hiking or whatever. So I really took a lot of stuff. When Father Jewison took a few things, Father Jewison thought we were going to have to pay for it. I did too, but it was a good price, so he ended up giving it to us. And then one day he asked me if I'd like a boat, and I said, well, sure. So I got a boat, and I had 3 kids with me when we picked it up. Went out on Clear Lake in Waseca. Went around the lake about 3 times, and we were taking turns skiing, they did. And all at once we were out of gas. So I put the car in front of it and towed it back to Herder's, and I said, that engine uses a lot of gas. He said, well, how long did you have it going? So I told him. He said, that's pretty good. So I took it back to Mankato, and I parked it in the front yard. I thought, I can't afford a boat, this is out of the question. So we sold chances on it all over the whole area. Each parish, we'd have the kids from that parish sell chances after each mass, and we made pretty good funds on that. It was a good fundraiser. But, again, the kids did it. It was their idea to raffle, it was their idea to sell, and they always came through. They were a great group of kids, always. And I see them from time to time. And one time I had mass at the Bemidji, and there were 6 couples from the Newman Center at that one mass. That was just unbelievable. And another time I was talking at the Hackensack Parish, and I mentioned a couple we'd had at Newman Center, and I said, gosh, that was one of the craziest weddings I ever had. The bride lived on a lake out in the country, and the brothers took a big bathtub out in the middle of the lake, but not before they had put the clothes they were going to take on their honeymoon in a tub. And the guy was really anxious because he told, if that gets close enough that we can take it out again, we'll do it, so you better get out there first. Anyway, I told the story, and he waded up right to his neck and got that luggage out before the honeymoon, of course. And I said, I wonder what ever happened to that couple. They were a great pair. And they were both at that mass. And they stood up, they were right here, Father, this is our 40th wedding anniversary. And so wherever I go, I keep meeting the kids. They're not kids anymore, but from the Newman Center. And at heart, they're still kids. And I get calls from time to time, can you meet us at such a restaurant when we're in town? And so I'm still at Newman, I guess. I'll never get out of there, which is great, yeah. When I received my orders from the bishop, I had a choice between living in a little bedroom upstairs or staying with Monsignor Matthews at St. John's. So I didn't know which way to go. I was pretty new yet, only 4 years out. I went down and talked to Monsignor Matthews and had a bowl of soup there, and I thought, gee, Father Matthews doesn't live very well. That's about the thinnest soup I've ever seen. So anyway, I ate the soup and decided Newman Center was the place I should live, which was the right choice. You're right there with the kids all the time. They have problems 24 hours a day. somebody does. But Monsignor Matthews said this to me: if you want to stay young, Paul, work with the young. If you want to get old, try to keep up to them. I think that's the best advice I could give you, is the best advice he could give me. He had a lot of good witticisms about him, and I always liked that one. Don't try to keep up. And it's interesting, I was working for my master's degree in English, and these two kids kind of adopted me. They were real sharp, and they had a knack I never figured out. How do they know what the answer is going to be without getting the quiz first? But they were right on. If there were going to be 5 questions, they'd have those 5. Just get this, Father, that's all we'll worry about. Well, I was really riding through on them. But one day, almost forgetting where the power was, I asked one of them, I used to sit between them in class, do you think any students here are upset with me because I'm breaking the curve? And he said, they're just amazed you try to keep up. I thought, hey, that's what Matthews was talking about. Forget about trying to keep up with them. You're not going to keep up with kids. And that was the day I decided, yeah, Monsignor Matthews, you're a prophet, and I think I better get out of here. That I can't keep up to them. But if I were Father Barden, I could have. But I don't know, I think being available is what the kids wanted to serve, you know. Even Christ goes along with that. I came not to be served, but to serve. You know. But I think it depends on the person. I think the Newman Chaplain has to be well read. There's a book out right now. It's been out a couple of years. It's named Uncovered, and the author is not to be known. In other words, doesn't want herself to be identified. She's a counselor in a big school in California. And she states in that book so beautifully what the kids are up against in colleges today in regard to drinking, in regard to sex, in regard to the whole ball of problems. And I think the Newman Chaplain, they should have that read, and they should have it as disposal of when people come with specific problems along those lines. It's there for them. It's an outstanding book, but she doesn't want herself to be known because it's politically she knows it's not correct on most campuses. So everything I see about Newman, you know, in the newspapers and whatever, I rejoice because the news basically on Newman Centers doesn't change. It's very necessary, it's very important. We form the lives of a lot of people at a very important age in their existence. And, I just feel that the 15 years I spent there I couldn't have spent them in any better way. It couldn't have happened. And I think you don't go there unless you're there because you love those kids. I think, too, another thing that happened that I thought was wonderful, Bob Kaufman all the Kaufmans were good friends of mine. In fact, the people in Mankato were good friends. They were always good to me. And then Bob Kaufman one time gave me $500. He's used this for a kid that has problems. And I did. And at one time I had that $500 to almost $4,000. Kids would pay back what I'd loaned them, and with interest, sometimes double. And the guy came in, he'd just been out of the service, and I didn't follow up the story, but he wanted the whole amount, and that ended that fund. Now, the other thing, the old house, we had a telephone there, and everybody on campus used that phone. We just had a bowl out there. And that bowl was always full of coins, long distance calls and the rest. And it helped to support the Newman Center. It really did. They're doing more for us than we were for them. And I think that's an important thought, that anytime you can invest in Newman Center as an organization, I don't know where you could better invest your money for the future. You know, what's more important than any soul? Any soul. But they're great years.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there are so many stories. we used to have kids come over and they say, I don't know if we're gonna graduate, but it seems like we're majoring in Newman instead of in our courses. And you've caught that too.
Of course,
You know,
yeah.
that's the fact.
Yeah.
They love you and you love them, and nothing goes wrong when that's where it's at. But Tim, I think you're the right man at the right time. And again, I'm removed from it a long ways. I help out once in a while up at the Newman Center at Bemidji. St. Anne's is there for the students. But I've never been in Newman Center where it was as good as it was here. This is the best place. And we had help from the town. We had Dr. Eusterman was a doctor. He was born and raised in the Lewiston area. He had a delightful wife. She was so good. And she cataloged all the books we had in the Newman Library. It took her over 2 years. That was nice. And we had a sound system throughout the building where we played soft music. And if you wanted to study, you came to the Newman Library. That's where kids came to study. And they were quiet there. Nobody came up there to goof off. That was it.
When you were there, did you have any school sisters of Notre Dame?
Yes. They were very generous. They sent the best of nuns. They were always, never a loser. They were the best, yeah. And they lived right next door. We had Philippine priests who used to come and get their master's degrees at Mankato State. And they lived next door, and then when they were all finished with their education, that program dropped out by itself, I guess. But they were great priests too. They did a lot of help. They were a great help. They were very talented. They were really filled in. One was a musician, one was an artist, and they were good. They were good. They were loved in town. But the sisters moved in after they left, so we always had 2 or 3 sisters there. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And what they were all, Sister Grace, I don't know what I would have done about her. She used to keep rule for me. We had classes that were taught through St. Mary's at that time in Winona. And she'd take the roll and make sure everybody was there and didn't skip out if they had. It used to last 3 hours, so we'd give them a break at the hour and a half mark for 5 minutes. But she'd make sure nobody had skipped out. They were all great, but she's the one that I probably remember with the most gratitude. All of them I'm grateful. And I hope that a lot of people that are responsible for your students at Mankato State. Thank you.
Yes.